The notification sound on my phone at 11:47 p.m. should have been my first warning. My parents never texted that late. Never. But there it was, glowing on my nightstand as I lay in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a broken heart. I picked up my phone, expecting maybe a random meme from my mom or a reminder about Sunday dinner. Instead, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a group message. To me, my older brother Marcus, and my younger sister Talia. The subject line read, "Family discussion important." The message was from my dad's number, but I could practically hear my mother's voice dictating every calculated word. "After much consideration and prayer, your mother and I have decided that we think it's best you step away from family gatherings for now, Bryn. Recent events have caused significant stress and division in our family, and we need time to heal. We hope you understand this comes from a place of love and protection for everyone involved. We'll be in touch when we feel the time is right." I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each time, the words felt like physical blows to my chest. If you've ever had your entire world crumble in a single text message, then you know that moment when your brain refuses to process what you're reading. When reality becomes so distorted that you actually start laughing because surely this has to be some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't a joke. And if you're listening to this story, if you've clicked on this video, then please, and I mean this, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to take you on a journey that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and the lengths people will go to protect their perfect little lies. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. The recent events they mentioned? Let me paint you a picture. 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered that my golden child brother Marcus, the one with the perfect wife, the perfect house, the perfect job at Dad's accounting firm, had been embezzling money from our family's construction business. Not just a little money. We're talking about $67,000 over the course of 18 months. Money that was supposed to go toward my grandmother's nursing home care. Money that was supposed to keep the business afloat during the pandemic. Money that was supposed to help my parents retire with dignity. I found out completely by accident. I was helping my dad organize his home office because he'd been complaining about feeling overwhelmed with paperwork. Mom was visiting my aunt in Phoenix, and Dad had thrown out his back, so I offered to spend my weekends sorting through his disaster of a filing system. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to be a good daughter. But there it was, buried in a stack of bank statements that hadn't been filed properly. Transfer after transfer to an account I didn't recognize. Always in amounts just under $10,000, clearly trying to avoid triggering any automatic fraud alerts. The account number looked familiar, and when I cross-referenced it with some old paperwork I'd seen at Marcus's house during his last barbecue, my stomach dropped. It was his personal savings account. The one he'd mentioned using to buy his wife Chelsea's surprise anniversary trip to Europe. The one that had funded their kitchen renovation. The one that had somehow allowed a man making $75,000 a year to live like he was pulling in twice that. I spent the next 4 hours going through every statement I could find. The pattern was clear, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Marcus had been systematically stealing from our family for over a year and a half. Now, here's where most people would say I should have gone to my parents immediately. But you have to understand the dynamics in my family. Marcus was the prince. The firstborn son, who could do no wrong. The one who'd gotten a business degree, who'd married young to a woman my parents adored, who'd given them their first grandchild. He was everything they'd ever wanted in a child. And me? I was the screw-up. The daughter who dropped out of nursing school to pursue photography, a decision that had been thrown in my face at every family gathering for the past 5 years. The one who was still single at 28, still living paycheck to paycheck, still figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. In their eyes, I was the family disappointment who couldn't even keep a steady boyfriend, let alone contribute anything meaningful to the family legacy. So when I confronted Marcus first, I thought I was giving him a chance to come clean. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was some explanation that would make sense. Maybe he'd borrowed the money and just hadn't told anyone. Maybe he was planning to pay it back. Maybe I was missing something crucial. I called him that Sunday night, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. "Hey, Bryn. What's up? Kind of late for you to be calling." His voice was cheerful, relaxed. The voice of someone without a guilty conscience. Marcus, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, sure. Everything all right? You sound weird. I took a deep breath, staring at the bank statements spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. I was helping Dad with his filing today, and I came across some bank transfers that I don't understand. Transfers to an account that looks like it might be yours. The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted them. I don't know what you're talking about, Bryn. Marcus, I have the account numbers right here. I have 18 months of statements. I know it's you. Another pause. Shorter this time, but I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Look, if Dad has some transfers to my account, it's probably reimbursements for business expenses or something. You know I help with a lot of the administrative stuff. $67,000 worth of business expenses? The line went completely quiet. So quiet I thought maybe the call had dropped. Marcus. We should talk in person. No, we should talk right now. Did you take money from the business or not? It's complicated. And there it was. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just it's complicated. The universal response of someone who's been caught red-handed and is frantically trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. It's really not complicated, Marcus. Either you took money that didn't belong to you or you didn't. I borrowed it, okay? I was going through a rough patch financially, and I knew the business had some extra cash flow, so I borrowed some with the intention of paying it back. I just hadn't gotten around to it yet. The audacity of that statement still takes my breath away. Borrowed. As if our family business was his personal bank account. As if the money sitting in those accounts wasn't earmarked for real expenses, real obligations, real people counting on it. A rough patch? Marcus, you just bought a $40,000 truck. Chelsea's posting Instagram photos from Napa Valley wine tours every weekend. What kind of rough patch involves luxury vacations? You wouldn't understand, Bryn. You've never had real responsibilities. You don't know what it's like to have a mortgage and a wife and a kid to provide for. And there it was. The classic Marcus deflection. Turn the conversation away from his crimes and toward my failures as a human being. Don't you dare turn this around on me. This isn't about my life choices. This is about you stealing from our family. I didn't steal anything. I told you I borrowed it. And I don't appreciate you going through private financial documents and then attacking me based on what you think you understand. What I think I understand. Marcus, I have a degree in accounting before I switched to nursing, remember? I know how to read bank statements. I know what embezzlement looks like. The call ended abruptly. He hung up on me. I sat in my kitchen until 3 in the morning, staring at those statements, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me hoped he'd call back with a real explanation. Part of me hoped he'd show up at my door with a check and an apology. Part of me hoped this was all some terrible misunderstanding that would make sense in the morning. But deep down, I knew better. I knew Marcus. I knew that smug, entitled attitude he'd carried since we were kids. I knew how he operated when he was cornered. And I knew that if I didn't do something about this, no one would. The next morning, I called my parents and asked if I could come over for dinner that night. Just the 3 of us. I said I had something important to discuss. I spent the entire day rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to present the evidence, how I was going to make them understand that their golden boy had been robbing them blind while they struggled to pay their bills and worry about their future. I walked into that house at 6 p.m. carrying a folder full of documentation, my laptop with spreadsheets I'd created to show the pattern of theft, and a heart full of naive hope that the truth would actually matter to them. What I didn't expect was to walk into an ambush. Marcus was there. So was Chelsea. So was my sister Talia, who lived 3 hours away and never came to random family dinners. They were all sitting around the dining room table like some kind of tribunal, and the moment I walked through the door, I knew I'd been set up. Bryn, my mother said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Marcus told us about your phone call last night. We need to talk. The dining room felt smaller than usual, like the walls were closing in. Everyone was already seated except me, and there was only one chair left, directly across from Marcus, like they'd planned it that way. like they wanted me to have to look him in the eye while they did whatever this was. "Sit down, honey," Dad said, but his voice had that particular tone he used when he was trying to stay calm but was actually furious underneath. I'd heard that voice exactly 3 times in my life. When I crashed his truck in high school, when I told him I was dropping out of nursing school, and now. I clutched my folder tighter and remained standing. "Before we start whatever this is, I need you all to see what I found." "What you found?" Marcus interrupted. "By going through private financial documents without permission." "They weren't private. They were in Dad's home office, and Dad asked me to organize them." "You had no business looking at bank statements that didn't concern you," Chelsea said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "What you did was a violation of privacy." I stared at her in disbelief. This woman who'd never worked a day in the family business, who showed up to family gatherings wearing jewelry that cost more than my monthly rent, was lecturing me about privacy violations while her husband had been systematically robbing my parents. A violation of privacy? I laughed, but it came out bitter and hollow. "Your husband has stolen $67,000 from this family, and you're worried about privacy?" "Allegedly stolen," Talia said quietly from her seat next to Mom. "And that's assuming your interpretation of what you saw is correct." I turned to look at my younger sister, my 26-year-old sister who I'd helped through college, who I'd let crash at my apartment for 3 months when she was between jobs, who I'd thought was on my side in this family's complex dynamics. "My interpretation? Talia, I literally have 18 months of bank transfers right here. There's nothing to interpret." "But there might be an explanation," Mom said, her hands folded perfectly in front of her on the table. "And the way you've handled this, calling Marcus directly, making accusations before talking to us, it's created a very difficult situation for everyone." I felt like I was in an alternate universe. Like I'd stepped through some kind of portal where stealing money was acceptable but reporting it was the real crime. "I called Marcus first because I wanted to give him a chance to explain before involving you and Dad. I thought I was being considerate." "What you were being was manipulative," Marcus said, and his voice was so calm, so reasonable, that for a split second I actually questioned my own sanity. "You ambushed me with accusations based on documents you had no right to examine, and when I tried to explain the situation, you refused to listen." "Explain what situation, Marcus? Please, explain it to all of us right now." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member, like he was drawing strength from their support. And that's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't a family meeting to discuss what Marcus had done. This was an intervention designed to shut me up. "Over the past year and a half, I've been helping Dad with some complicated financial transitions related to the business," Marcus began, his voice taking on that practice tone he used when he was lying. I'd heard it 1,000 times growing up. Some of those transactions involved temporarily moving funds to ensure they were protected during uncertain economic periods. Protected from what? I demanded. From potential creditors, from tax complications, from the kind of volatility that small businesses face during economic downturns. Dad nodded along like this made perfect sense. Marcus has been invaluable in helping me navigate some complex financial decisions. The construction industry has been unpredictable, and he's helped me protect our assets. By transferring them to his personal savings account. By temporarily housing them in a secure location until we could determine the best long-term strategy. I opened my folder and pulled out the bank statements, spreading them across the table like playing cards. "Then explain this." August 15th, transfer of $9,800 to Marcus's account. August 30th, $9,700. September 12th, $8,900. These aren't business strategy transfers. These are systematic withdrawals that just happen to be under the federal reporting limit. The room went silent. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear Chelsea's breathing getting faster, could feel the weight of everyone's stares. Dad picked up one of the statements and examined it carefully. For just a moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker across his face. For just a moment, I thought the evidence might actually matter. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "Bryn, I understand why this might look suspicious to someone without a background in business finance, but what you're seeing here is a carefully planned asset protection strategy. The amounts you're mentioning were moved with Dad's full knowledge and approval as part of a larger plan to restructure the business's financial position. Then why didn't anyone tell me about this plan when I found the transfers? Because it wasn't any of your business, Chelsea snapped. You're not part of the business operations. You're not financially responsible for any of the family's assets or debts. These are decisions made by the people who actually have skin in the game. The words hit me like physical slaps. Not part of the business operations. No skin in the game. As if I hadn't grown up on construction sites with Dad. As if I hadn't spent every summer of high school working in the office, doing data entry and answering phones. As if the reason I wasn't officially part of the business wasn't because Marcus had made it clear from the beginning that it was his domain and I wasn't welcome. Dad, I said, turning to face him directly. Is this true? Did you authorize all of these transfers? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something worse. Pity. Bryn, sweetheart, I know you mean well, but this is exactly why Marcus handles the financial side of things, and you focus on your photography. These kinds of business decisions are complicated, and they require experience and expertise that you just don't have. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, trying to process what was happening. They were lying. All of them. They were sitting around this table, looking me in the eye, and lying to protect Marcus. Either that, or they actually believed his ridiculous story about asset protection and business restructuring. But wait. If Dad had really authorized these transfers, if this was really some legitimate business strategy, then why hadn't Marcus just said that during our phone call? Why had he said it was complicated, that he'd borrowed the money with the intention of paying it back? Marcus, I said slowly, when we talked on the phone last night, you said you borrowed the money during a rough patch. You said you hadn't gotten around to paying it back yet. That's very different from what you're saying now about authorized business transfers. I watched his face carefully. For just a split second, I saw a flash of panic. Just a tiny crack in his composed facade. I was trying to simplify the explanation because I didn't think you'd understand the complexity of the situation, he said quickly. I used the word borrowed because from a technical standpoint, any time funds are moved from one account to another, even temporarily, it can be characterized as borrowing. But you specifically said you were going through a rough patch financially. We all were, Bryn. The whole family, the whole business. That's exactly why we needed to implement these protective measures. I looked around the table again. At my parents, who were nodding along with this explanation. At Talia, who was staring down at her hands. At Chelsea, who was glaring at me like I was the family enemy. And suddenly I understood. It didn't matter what evidence I had. It didn't matter what Marcus had actually said to me on the phone. It didn't matter that his story made no financial sense. They had already decided who they were going to believe, and it wasn't me. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. Bryn, wait. Mom called after me as I headed toward the back door. We're not finished discussing this. I turned around in the doorway, still clutching my folder of evidence that apparently meant nothing. What exactly are we discussing, Mom? Because it seems like you've all already made up your minds about what happened here. We're discussing your behavior, she said, and her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. We're discussing the fact that you went through private documents, made serious accusations against your brother, and created a crisis in this family based on your misunderstanding of a legitimate business arrangement. My behavior? Yes, your behavior. Marcus has done nothing but try to help this family, and you've repaid that by attacking his character and integrity. I felt something break inside my chest. Something that had been holding my world together for 28 years. And what about his behavior? What about the fact that his story doesn't make sense? What about the fact that he lied to me on the phone? He didn't lie to you, Dad said firmly. He tried to explain a complicated situation in terms you would understand, and you twisted his words to fit your narrative. My narrative? Bryn, Talia said softly, maybe you should just let this go. Maybe you misunderstood what you saw. I stared at my baby sister. The one I'd protected from bullies in high school, the one I'd lent money to when she couldn't make rent, the one I'd thought would always have my back. Let it go. For the sake of the family, she said, still not meeting my eyes. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about the money. This was about something much deeper. This was about the family hierarchy that had been established long before I was old enough to understand it. This was about maintaining a carefully constructed reality where Marcus was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the problematic daughter who caused trouble and needed to be managed. I looked around that table one more time, memorizing their faces in that moment. My parents, who had raised me to believe that honesty and integrity mattered above all else, choosing to protect their son's lies rather than face an uncomfortable truth. My sister, who I'd thought was my ally, asking me to sacrifice my principles for the sake of family peace. My brother, sitting there like a king holding court, not even bothering to look guilty because he knew he was untouchable. I can't let this go, I said quietly. I won't let this go. The silence that followed was deafening. Then maybe, Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, you need to think about what's more important to you, your family or being right. I walked out of that house knowing I'd just lost everything. The 3 weeks between that family meeting and the text message felt like living in purgatory. I kept expecting someone to call, someone to apologize, someone to admit that maybe I'd been right to be concerned about those bank transfers. Instead, I got silence. Complete, absolute silence from every member of my immediate family. I tried calling Dad twice. Both calls went to voicemail. I texted Mom asking if we could talk, just the two of us. She responded with a single sentence, "We've said everything that needs to be said for now." I even swallowed my pride and reached out to Talia, thinking maybe she'd be willing to listen to reason if I approached her privately. Her response broke my heart. "Bryn, I love you, but you're tearing this family apart. Please stop." Tearing the family apart? Me. The person who discovered financial fraud was accused of being the one causing damage. During those 3 weeks, I couldn't eat properly. I couldn't sleep. I kept going over every detail of that dinner, wondering if I could have handled it differently. Wondering if there was something I'd missed, some explanation that would make Marcus's behavior make sense. I even started researching business asset protection strategies, thinking maybe there was some legitimate financial practice I didn't understand. Maybe I really was wrong. Maybe I really was just too inexperienced to grasp what was happening. But every article I read, every expert opinion I found, every financial advisor's blog post I studied confirmed what I already knew. What Marcus had done wasn't asset protection. It was theft. Legitimate asset protection involves legal trusts, offshore accounts, business restructuring with proper documentation. It doesn't involve transferring money to personal savings accounts in amounts specifically designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. It doesn't involve secret transfers that the business owner supposedly authorized but somehow forgot to mention to his accountant or document in any official capacity. I was right. I knew I was right. But being right felt like the coldest, loneliest place in the world. The text message, when it finally came, shouldn't have surprised me. But somehow it did. I read it 17 times before it really sank in. They were banishing me. Actually banishing me from the family like I was some kind of toxic presence that needed to be removed for everyone else's safety. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The message had been sent to a group. Me, Marcus, and Talia. Which meant Marcus and Talia had received the exact same message I had. They were being told that I was being removed from family gatherings, but they were being told as if they were innocent bystanders in this decision. I took a screenshot of the message and stared at it until my eyes burned. This was psychological warfare. This was my parents making sure Marcus and Talia saw exactly how I was being punished for my behavior. This was them making it crystal clear what happened to family members who stepped out of line. But then, at 12:23 a.m., 36 minutes after the original message, something incredible happened. My phone buzzed with a new message. This one wasn't in the group chat. This one was private, sent directly to me from a number I hadn't heard from in over 2 years. It was from my Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister, the one who'd moved to Phoenix after her divorce, The one who only came back for major holidays. The one who'd always been the black sheep of my mother's family. Just saw the group message your parents sent. I don't know what this is about, but I know you, and I know you wouldn't cause family drama without a good reason.
Call me when you can.
Aunt Linda. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before I realized I was crying. Someone believed in me. Someone in my family was willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in this story. I called her immediately, even though it was 12:30 a.m. my time and 10:30 p.m. in Phoenix. Bryn, she answered on the first ring. Aunt Linda, I'm so sorry to call so late. Honey, don't apologize. I've been sitting here staring at that message your parents sent, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Your mom mentioned some kind of family conflict when I was visiting last month, but she made it sound like typical sibling drama. This doesn't sound typical. And just like that, the dam broke. I told her everything. The bank statements, the confrontation with Marcus, the family meeting ambush, the weeks of silence. I told her about Marcus's contradictory stories, about my parents' refusal to even consider that their golden boy might have done something wrong, about feeling like I was living in some kind of alternate reality where stealing money was acceptable but reporting it was a crime against the family. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. $67,000, she said finally. Yes. From the business account. Yes. And Marcus claims this was authorized asset protection? That's what he told them, yes. Another pause. Bryn, I need to tell you something about your brother that I probably should have told you a long time ago. My heart stopped. What do you mean? About 6 years ago, when Marcus was still in college, he got into some financial trouble. Gambling debts. Your parents bailed him out quietly, made him promise never to do it again, and they never told anyone in the family about it. The room started spinning again. Gambling debts. About $15,000. Your mom was mortified, your dad was furious, but they paid it off to protect Marcus's reputation and his future. They made him swear it was a one-time mistake, that he'd learned his lesson. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because your parents wanted to handle it privately. They were afraid that if word got out, it would hurt Marcus's job prospects, his relationship with Chelsea, his standing in the community. I felt like I was going to throw up. So they covered for him before. Linda confirmed. And it sounds like they're covering for him again. But this is different. This isn't gambling debts. This is stealing from the family business. Honey, do you really think it's different to them? Or do you think this is just a larger version of the same pattern they've been enabling for years? The pieces were falling into place in my mind. Marcus's entitled attitude, his confidence during that family meeting, his certainty that he would be protected no matter what he'd done. He'd been through this before. He knew exactly how it would play out. Linda, what should I do? First, you should know that I believe you. 100%. What you're describing isn't asset protection, and it's not a misunderstanding. It's theft, plain and simple. But what can I do about it? They've made it clear they won't listen to me. Well, that depends. Do you want to let this go for the sake of family peace, or do you want to fight for what's right? I can't let it go. This money was supposed to help pay for Grandma Rose's nursing home. It was supposed to help Mom and Dad retire. It was supposed to keep the business running during slow periods. Marcus stole from our grandmother, Linda. He stole from our parents' future. Then we're going to fight.
We. She said we.
What do you mean? I mean I'm flying out there next week, and we're going to figure this out together. Your parents might not want to listen to you, but they'll have a harder time dismissing both of us. Especially when I start asking them some very pointed questions about why they're more concerned with protecting Marcus than they are with protecting their business and their retirement. I started crying again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming feeling of not being completely alone anymore. Linda, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This family has a problem with enabling destructive behavior and punishing people for telling the truth. It's the same pattern that drove me away in the first place, and I'll be damned if I'm going to watch them do it to you. We talked for another hour. Linda asked me to gather every piece of documentation I had, not just the bank statements, but any business records I could access, any conversations I'd had with Marcus, any evidence that might help establish a timeline of the theft. "And Bryn," she said before we hung up. "Yeah? That text message they sent tonight? The one banishing you from family gatherings? Forward it to me." "Why?" "Because I want to make sure I understand exactly what they think they're doing here. And I want documentation of how they're handling this situation." After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Hope. But that hope was mixed with something else. Something darker and more dangerous. Anger. Pure, crystallized anger at being manipulated and gaslit and punished for doing the right thing. Anger at watching my brother steal from our family and then play the victim when he got caught. Anger at my parents for choosing their comfortable lies over the truth. Anger at my sister for asking me to sacrifice my integrity for the sake of family harmony. If they wanted to cast me as the family villain, then maybe it was time to embrace the role. If they wanted to push me out, then maybe it was time to show them what real consequences looked like. I opened my laptop and started typing. I documented everything. Every conversation, every date, every dollar amount. I created a timeline of Marcus's theft and my family's response to it. I researched the legal implications of what he'd done. I looked up the contact information for the state's Attorney General's office, for the IRS fraud reporting hotline, for every agency that might be interested in a case of systematic embezzlement. I wasn't ready to make any calls yet, but I wanted to be prepared. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If my family thought they could sacrifice me to protect Marcus, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The war was just beginning. Aunt Linda arrived on a Wednesday morning, and I'd never been so happy to see another human being in my entire life. She looked exactly the same as she had at Christmas 2 years ago, shoulder-length gray hair that she wore with pride, laugh lines around her eyes, and that particular brand of quiet confidence that comes from surviving a messy divorce and rebuilding your life from scratch. But there was something different about her now. A hardness I'd never seen before. A determination that made me believe we actually had a chance at getting through to my parents. "Show me everything," she said before she'd even set down her suitcase. I spread the documentation across my kitchen table, bank statements, business records I'd managed to access through the company's shared drive before my parents thought to revoke my access, screenshots of my text conversations with Marcus, printed emails, handwritten notes documenting every conversation I could remember. Linda put on her reading glasses and examined each document carefully, occasionally making notes in a small notebook she'd brought with her. After about an hour, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is worse than I thought," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean this isn't just theft, Bryn. This is sophisticated financial fraud. Look at these dates." She pointed to the timeline I'd created. The transfers don't correspond to any business cycles or cash flow needs. They're not random. They're planned. She was right. Now that I looked at it laid out chronologically, I could see the pattern I'd missed before. Marcus had been taking money right before major family expenses. Right before Christmas, when my parents would be struggling to buy gifts for grandchildren. Right before property tax payments were due. Right before the slow winter months, when construction work dried up. He was timing it, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was timing it, Linda confirmed. He was taking money when he knew your parents would be too stressed and distracted to notice irregular transactions. That's not desperation, honey. That's calculation. I felt sick. I'd been thinking of Marcus as someone who'd made a series of bad decisions, someone who'd gotten in over his head and panicked. But this evidence painted a very different picture. This was the work of someone who'd planned every step, someone who deliberately exploited his parents' trust and their predictable financial pressures. "There's something else," Linda said, pulling out her phone. "I did some research on the flight out here. Do you remember Marcus's friend Kyle from college? The one who got arrested for insurance fraud about 3 years ago." I vaguely remembered some drama about one of Marcus's fraternity brothers, but I hadn't paid much attention to the details. Sort of. Why? Because Kyle wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger scheme involving several people who'd learned how to exploit small business accounting systems. The FBI broke up the whole operation, but several people were never charged because they'd covered their tracks well enough that prosecutors couldn't build solid cases against them. My blood went cold. You think Marcus was involved? I think it's worth investigating. The timing is interesting. Marcus started taking money from her parents about 6 months after Kyle's arrest. It's possible he learned some techniques that he thought would keep him safe from prosecution. Linda spent the next 2 days conducting what she called reconnaissance. She visited the construction office, chatting casually with a secretary who'd known her for years. She stopped by the coffee shop where my mom met her book club every Thursday morning. She even attended the same church service as my parents, sitting in the back and observing their behavior. What she found was illuminating. Your parents are scared, Bryn, she told me over dinner on Friday night. I mean genuinely, deeply scared. Of what? Of the truth getting out. Of people in their community finding out that their son has been stealing from them. Of losing their reputation, their standing in the church, their sense of identity as successful parents who raised good children. She took a sip of wine before continuing. I talked to Margaret. You remember Margaret from the office? And she mentioned that your parents have been acting strange lately. Stressed, secretive, avoiding social events they usually attend. Your father has been making comments about early retirement, but not in a good way. More like he's being forced into it. Because Marcus stole their retirement money.
Exactly.
But they can't admit that publicly without admitting what Marcus did. So they're trapped. They can either face the truth and deal with the social consequences, or they can maintain the lie and sacrifice their financial future. I pushed food around on my plate, trying to process this information. So they're choosing to protect Marcus's reputation over their own financial security.
It appears that way.
And here's the kicker. I think Marcus knows exactly what position he's put them in. I think he's counting on their pride and their fear of social embarrassment to keep them from taking any real action against him. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Marcus hadn't just stolen money from our parents. He'd stolen their choices, their freedom, their ability to seek justice without destroying their own lives in the process. Linda, what if we confronted him directly? Not the family meeting ambush thing, but just Marcus. What if we presented him with all of this evidence and demanded he pay the money back? Linda was quiet for a long moment considering. We could try that. But I suspect he'd just deny everything again, and then he'd warn your parents that you're not dropping this. That might push them to take even more extreme measures to shut you down. More extreme than banishing me from the family? They could threaten legal action against you for harassment. They could spread rumors about your mental health, your stability, your motivations. They could make it impossible for you to maintain relationships with anyone in your extended family. The thought was terrifying but not surprising. I was beginning to understand that my parents weren't just protecting Marcus, they were protecting themselves. And people protecting themselves could be incredibly dangerous when cornered. So what do? Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We gather more evidence. We document everything. We make sure we have an absolutely bulletproof case before we make any moves. Evidence of what? We already have the bank statements. Evidence of the impact, Bryn. Evidence of what this theft has cost your parents, what it's costing your grandmother, what it's going to cost the business. Numbers they can't argue with, consequences they can't minimize. Over the weekend, Linda helped me dig deeper into the family's financial situation. What we found was devastating. The money Marcus had stolen wasn't just sitting in some account somewhere, earning interest until he decided to pay it back. It was gone. Spent on vacations, home improvements, Chelsea's jewelry, Marcus's truck, private school tuition for their daughter. Every dollar of it had been converted into lifestyle upgrades that they couldn't liquidate even if they wanted to. Meanwhile, my parents had been making increasingly desperate financial decisions to cover the shortfall. They'd taken out a second mortgage on their house. They delayed necessary repairs on business equipment. They'd reduced their contributions to their retirement accounts. They'd even, and this broke my heart, they'd reduced the amount they were paying for Grandma Rose's nursing home, moving her to a cheaper facility with a lower quality care. Jesus, Linda whispered when we found the nursing home paperwork. They moved your grandmother to save money that their son had stolen. I started crying again. Ugly, angry tears that felt like they were burning my face. Grandma Rose had raised my mother after my grandfather died in a construction accident. She'd worked 2 jobs to put Mom through college. She'd been the one who taught me to bake, who listened to my problems when I was a teenager, who never missed a single one of my high school basketball games even though arthritis made it painful for her to sit in those bleacher seats. And now she was in a substandard nursing home because Marcus needed money for European vacations. We have to stop him, I said through my tears. I don't care what it costs me. I don't care if they never speak to me again. We have to stop him. Linda nodded grimly. Then we need to be smart about this. We need leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes it more painful for them to protect Marcus than it is to do the right thing. She was quiet for a moment, staring out my kitchen window at the apartment complex parking lot. Bryn, how much do you know about your parents' social circle? Their church, their business associations, their community involvement? Quite a bit. Why? Because reputation is clearly the most important thing to them right now. More important than justice, more important than their financial security, maybe even more important than their relationship with you. So we need to make them understand that protecting Marcus is actually going to destroy their reputation, not preserve it. I didn't like the direction this conversation was headed. Linda, I don't want to blackmail my own parents. It's not blackmail, honey. It's consequences. Natural, inevitable consequences for the choices they're making. She turned back to face me, and I saw that hardness in her expression again. Your parents have made a calculation. They've decided that sacrificing you is worth protecting Marcus. They've decided that moving your grandmother to a cheaper nursing home is preferable to confronting their son about his theft. They've decided that risking their financial future is better than facing social embarrassment. So, we're going to show them that they've miscalculated. We're going to show them that the truth has a way of coming out regardless of how hard they try to suppress it. And we're going to make sure they understand that their best chance of controlling the narrative is to get ahead of it. Linda pulled out her notebook and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to document every single impact of Marcus's theft. The second mortgage, the reduced retirement contributions, your grandmother's situation, the business equipment that needs repair, everything. We're going to put together a comprehensive picture of the damage he's caused. Okay. Second, we're going to research the legal options available to your parents if they wanted to pursue charges against Marcus. We're going to find out exactly what a criminal prosecution would look like, what the likely outcomes would be, what kind of restitution might be possible. And third, we're going to give them one last chance to do the right thing voluntarily. We're going to present them with all of this information and offer them a choice. They can handle this privately, as a family, with Marcus making full restitution and accepting consequences for his actions, or they can continue protecting him while we pursue other options. What other options? Linda's smile was cold and sharp, the kind that take the decision out of their hands completely. Something tells me you're starting to understand where this story is going. And if you are, then you know that what happened next changed everything, not just for Marcus, not just for my parents, but for our entire extended family, our community, and everyone who thought they knew who the real villains were in this situation. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because what Linda and I discovered next will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. But first, we had to make one more devastating discovery that would turn this from a family dispute into something much darker and more dangerous. And it started with a phone call I never expected to receive. The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Linda and I had finished compiling our evidence. I was barely awake, stumbling toward the coffee maker in my pajamas, when my phone started ringing with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello. Is this Bryn Murphy? The voice was female, older, with a slight southern accent I couldn't quite place. Yes, who is this? My name is Patricia Hensley. I think we need to talk. The name didn't mean anything to me, but something in her tone made me pay attention.
About what?
About your brother Marcus and what he did to my family. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. What did you say? I said we need to talk. Are you free this morning? An hour later, I was sitting in a diner across from a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Patricia Hensley was impeccably dressed, spoke with the careful precision of someone used to being listened to, and carried herself with the bearing of a woman who'd spent decades managing other people's problems. She was also, as I was about to learn, the former office manager of Henderson and Associates, the accounting firm where Marcus had worked before joining Dad's construction business. I've been following your family situation, she said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table toward me. Word gets around in professional circles, especially when it involves financial irregularities. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, payroll records, and what looked like internal company memos. All of them had Marcus's name highlighted in yellow. What am I looking at? Evidence that your brother's problems with other people's money didn't start with your family's business. The documents told a story that made my stomach turn. Over the course of 18 months at Henderson and Associates, Marcus had systematically stolen nearly $40,000 from client escrow accounts. Small amounts, taken from accounts belonging to elderly clients who rarely checked their statements carefully. Money that was supposed to be held in trust while estate and tax matters were resolved. He was stealing from dead people's families, Patricia said bluntly. Widows, children who'd just lost parents, people who were grieving and not paying close attention to financial details. I stared at the evidence in front of me, trying to process what this meant. Why wasn't he prosecuted? Patricia's expression darkened. Because the senior partners at Henderson and Associates made the same calculation your parents did. They decided it would be better for the firm's reputation to quietly fire Marcus and make restitution to the affected accounts than to report the theft and risk negative publicity. So, he got away with it. He got away with it. And then he moved on to your family's business and did the exact same thing, just on a larger scale. The diner felt like it was spinning around me. Marcus wasn't just someone who'd made a mistake, someone who'd gotten desperate and made bad choices. He was a serial embezzler, a predator who specifically targeted people who trusted him, people who were vulnerable, people who wouldn't be looking over his shoulder. Patricia, why are you telling me this? She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Because one of the clients he stole from was my mother-in-law, 87 years old, dementia setting in, completely dependent on her family to manage her affairs. Marcus took $12,000 from her estate account over the course of 6 months. Money that was supposed to pay for her medical care. Oh my God. When we discovered the theft, the firm's partners convinced us not to pursue criminal charges. They said it would be a long, stressful process that wouldn't be good for someone in my mother-in-law's condition. They said they'd make full restitution and ensure Marcus never worked in accounting again. They made it sound like they were protecting us. But they weren't. No, they weren't. They were protecting themselves and their reputation. And in the process, they enabled Marcus to move on and do the same thing to another family. Your family. I closed the folder, my hands still shaking. What do you want from me? I want justice. Not just for my family, but for yours, and for whoever Marcus is going to victimize next if we don't stop him. What are you suggesting? Patricia leaned back in her seat and studied my face carefully. I'm suggesting we pool our resources. I have evidence of Marcus's crimes at Henderson and Associates. You have evidence of what he did to your family. Together, we have a pattern of behavior that might be enough to convince a prosecutor to take this seriously. The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. For weeks, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone, like I was David facing Goliath with nothing but a slingshot and a handful of stones. But now, suddenly I had an ally. Someone with evidence, with legal knowledge, with resources I didn't have access to. Have you talked to a lawyer? I've talked to several lawyers. The consensus is that individual cases of embezzlement under $50,000 are difficult to prosecute, especially when the stolen money has been spent rather than hidden. but a pattern of behavior across multiple victims, especially when it involves exploitation of vulnerable populations like the elderly. She let the sentence hang in the air. That's a different story entirely. We spent the next 2 hours going through Patricia's evidence in detail. What she'd uncovered was even more damaging than what I'd found in my family's records. Marcus had specifically targeted elderly clients with complex financial situations, people who relied on the accounting firm to manage trusts and estate accounts. He'd been careful to steal amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts, and he timed his thefts to coincide with other legitimate transactions to make them harder to detect. Most importantly, Patricia had documentation proving that the senior partners at Henderson and Associates knew exactly what Marcus had done and chose to cover it up rather than report it to the authorities. This is conspiracy, I said, staring at an email chain between the firm's partners discussing how to handle the Marcus Murphy situation without unnecessary legal complications. It's worse than conspiracy. It's a pattern of enabling that allowed Marcus to continue committing crimes. And I'm willing to bet your family isn't his last stop. The thought sent chills down my spine. Marcus was married now, had a young daughter, was supposedly building a stable life. But if Patricia was right, if this was a pattern of behavior rather than a series of isolated incidents, then he was probably already looking for his next opportunity. Patricia, what exactly are you proposing we do? I'm proposing we take this to the FBI. My heart stopped. The FBI. Bank fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud. When you start adding up all the charges that could apply to Marcus's activities across multiple institutions, this becomes a federal case. The FBI has specialized units that deal with exactly this kind of systematic financial fraud. The idea of involving federal law enforcement felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. This wasn't just about getting justice anymore. This was about potentially sending my brother to federal prison. I need to think about this. Of course you do. This is a big decision, and it's going to have consequences for your entire family. But Bryn, I want you to consider something. What? Every day that Marcus isn't held accountable for what he's done is another day he has to find new victims. Another day he has to perfect his methods, to become more sophisticated, to cause more damage. The longer we wait, the more people he's going to hurt. I thought about Grandma Rose in her substandard nursing home. I thought about my parents' financial stress, their sleepless nights, their forced retirement. I thought about Patricia's mother-in-law, an elderly woman with dementia whose medical care money had been stolen by someone she trusted. And then I thought about Marcus at that family dinner, sitting there so confidently, so certain that he was protected, so smug in his belief that there would be no real consequences for his actions. How long do I have to decide? Take as much time as you need. But I should mention that I've already reached out to 2 other families who had similar experiences with Marcus at Henderson and Associates. They're willing to cooperate with an investigation if we move forward. 2 other families? Victims we didn't know about during the internal investigation at the firm. People who came forward afterwards started spreading about what had happened. The total amount of money involved is probably close to $100,000 across all victims. $100,000. Stolen from elderly people, from families in crisis, from people who trusted him to handle their most important financial affairs. I walked out of that diner knowing that everything had changed. This wasn't just about my family anymore. This wasn't just about proving I was right and Marcus was wrong. This was about stopping a predator before he could hurt anyone else. But first, I had to figure out how to tell Linda what I'd learned. And then I had to decide whether I was brave enough to potentially destroy my entire family in order to seek justice for all of Marcus's victims. The answer to that question would determine not just my future, but the future of everyone I'd ever loved. And if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing the right thing, you know exactly how impossible that decision feels. Because sometimes the people we love the most are the ones capable of the most unforgivable acts. And sometimes the only way to truly protect them is to make sure they face the consequences of their choices, no matter how much it destroys us in the process. The war was about to become something much bigger than a family dispute. It was about to become a federal case. Linda took the news about Patricia Hensley better than I expected. We were sitting in my living room, Patricia's evidence spread across my coffee table alongside our own documentation, and Linda was methodically going through each document with the focus of someone building a legal case. "This changes everything," she said finally, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This makes Marcus a serial predator, not just someone who made a desperate mistake." "I know. And it makes your parents' decision to protect him even more problematic. They're not just enabling their son anymore, they're helping a career criminal avoid prosecution." The words hit me like physical blows. Career criminal. That's what my brother was. Not someone who'd gotten in over his head, not someone who'd made bad choices during a difficult time, but an actual career criminal who systematically targeted vulnerable people. "Linda, what if we're making a mistake? What if involving the FBI destroys our family for nothing? What if they can't actually prosecute him?" Linda set down the documents and looked at me seriously. "Bryn, what if we don't do anything and Marcus moves on to his next victim? What if it's another elderly person with dementia? What if it's another family business run by trusting parents who don't want to believe their child could hurt them?" I knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling ready to act on it emotionally are two very different things. "I keep thinking about Christmas morning when Marcus was 12 and I was 10, I said quietly. "He saved up his allowance for 3 months to buy me this stupid little camera because I'd mentioned wanting to take pictures. It wasn't even a good camera, just some plastic thing from the drugstore, but he was so proud of himself for remembering." Linda's expression softened. "Honey, people are complicated. Marcus can be the brother who bought you that camera and also be someone who steals money from elderly people with dementia. Those things can both be true at the same time. But how do I reconcile those two versions of him in my head?" "You don't have to. You just have to decide which version is the one that exists now, today, and what you're going to do about it." We spent the rest of the afternoon wargaming different scenarios. What would happen if we went to the FBI and they decided not to pursue the case? What would happen if they did pursue it and Marcus was arrested? What would happen to my parents, to Talia, to Marcus's daughter? Every possible outcome seemed to involve some level of devastating consequences for people I loved. But then Linda asked me a question that cut through all of my doubts and fears. "Bryn, if Marcus wasn't your brother, if he was just some random person who had stolen money from your parents and from elderly victims, what would you want to happen to him?" The answer came immediately. I'd want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. "Then why should it be different just because you share DNA with him?" It shouldn't be different. I knew that. But knowing something and feeling it are two entirely different things, especially when you're talking about potentially sending your own brother to federal prison. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the victims, my parents, Grandma Rose, Patricia's mother-in-law, the other families we didn't even know about yet. I kept thinking about Marcus somewhere out there, probably sleeping peacefully, confident that his parents would continue protecting him no matter what evidence surfaced. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Talia. "Can we talk? Just the two of us." I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. "When? Tomorrow afternoon? Coffee? Okay." The next day, I met Talia at the same coffee shop where we used to study together when she was in college, and I was working my way through community college photography classes. She looked tired, stressed, older than her 26 years. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Thanks. You too." We ordered our drinks in awkward silence and found a table in the back corner, away from other customers. "Bryn, what's going on?" Talia asked once we were seated. "And don't tell me it's nothing. Mom and Dad are acting like they're under siege. Marcus is jumpy and paranoid. Everyone's walking around like they're waiting for the other shoe to drop." I studied my sister's face, trying to figure out how much I could trust her. She'd disappointed me during that family meeting, but she was also the person who'd called me when she needed help, who'd trusted me with her secrets, who'd once told me I was the only person in our family who really understood her. "What has Marcus told you about what happened?" "He said you misunderstood some business transactions and accused him of stealing money. He said Mom and Dad explained everything to you, but you refused to accept their explanation because you wanted to cause drama." Classic Marcus. Turning himself into the victim and me into the villain. And what do Mom and Dad say? Talia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. They say you're going through a difficult time and that you've become fixated on this idea that Marcus did something wrong. They think you might need professional help. Professional help. They were questioning my mental health now. Of course they were. Talia, what if I told you that I have bank statements proving Marcus took $67,000 from the business? What if I told you that I have documentation showing exactly when and how he took the money? I'd say that maybe you're interpreting the documents differently than Mom and Dad are. What if I told you that Marcus did the same thing at his previous job? That he was fired for stealing money from client accounts? Talia's face went very still. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the photos I'd taken of Patricia's documents. I'm talking about a pattern of behavior, Talia. I'm talking about Marcus being a serial embezzler who targets people who trust him. She stared at the images on my phone screen, her face getting paler with each document. Where did you get these? From one of his victims at Henderson and Associates. Her name is Patricia Hensley, and Marcus stole $12,000 from her elderly mother-in-law's estate account. Talia set my phone down on the table like it had burned her fingers. Bryn, you need to stop. Stop what? Stop digging into this. Stop collecting evidence. Stop trying to destroy our family. I'm not trying to destroy our family. I'm trying to get justice for the people Marcus has hurt. By sending our brother to prison? If that's what justice looks like, then yes. Talia stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup in the process. Hot liquid spread across the table, and I grabbed napkins to clean it up while she just stood there staring at me. You've lost your mind, she said quietly. You're so obsessed with being right that you're willing to destroy everyone who loves you. Everyone who loves me? Talia, our parents banished me from the family for telling the truth. Marcus stole money that was supposed to pay for Grandma Rose's nursing home. How exactly am I the one destroying people? Because you won't let it go. Because you keep digging and investigating and collecting evidence instead of just accepting that maybe you made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. Then prove it. The challenge hung in the air between us. I could show her everything. Patricia's evidence, the timeline Linda and I had constructed, the documentation of how Marcus's theft had forced our parents into financial crisis. I could prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that I was right about what Marcus had done. But I realized in that moment that proof wasn't what Talia was asking for. What she was really asking for was a way to continue believing in the version of our family that she needed to exist. She was asking me to sacrifice the truth so that she could keep living in a world where our parents were good people who made reasonable decisions and our brother was someone who might make mistakes but would never deliberately hurt anyone. Talia, if I prove it to you, if I show you evidence that makes it impossible to deny what Marcus has done, will you help me convince Mom and Dad to do the right thing? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the coffee-stained table. If you prove it to me, I'll try to help you find a way to handle this that doesn't destroy our entire family. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was better than nothing. Okay, give me a week. A week to do what? To show you everything. To introduce you to Patricia Hensley. To help you understand that this isn't about me wanting to be right or wanting to cause drama. This is about stopping someone who's hurting people and will continue hurting people if we don't take action. Talia nodded reluctantly. 1 week. But Bryn, if this goes where I think it's going, if you're planning to involve law enforcement, you need to understand that there's no coming back from that. Once you make that call, once you set those wheels in motion, everything changes forever. I know.
Do you?
Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand that if you're wrong about any of this, if there's any possibility that Marcus is telling the truth, then you're about to commit the most unforgivable betrayal in our family's history. I met her eyes directly. And if I'm right, then our family has already been betrayed by someone much closer to home. She left without saying goodbye, and I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at the photos on my phone and trying to figure out if I was making the biggest mistake of my life or finally doing something that should have been done months ago. The next morning, Linda and I made the call to Patricia Hensley. It was time to move forward. Patricia Hensley had connections I hadn't expected. 25 years as an office manager at a prestigious accounting firm had given her relationships throughout the legal and financial community, and she used every single one of them to build our case. Within a week of our first meeting, she'd connected with FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, a woman who specialized in financial crimes and had particular experience with cases involving elder abuse and systematic embezzlement. Agent Santos agreed to meet with us on a Friday afternoon at the FBI field office, and I spent the entire drive there fighting the urge to turn around and go home. "You're doing the right thing," Linda kept saying, but her voice sounded strained, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. Agent Santos was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with short dark hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you feel like she could see straight through any lie you might be tempted to tell. She listened to our story without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "The pattern you're describing is consistent with other cases we've investigated," she said when we finished presenting our evidence. "Serial embezzlers often target vulnerable populations, elderly people, small family businesses, organizations where they're trusted and oversight is minimal." "So, you think we have a case?" Patricia asked. "I think you have enough evidence to warrant an investigation. But I need to be clear about what that means. Once we open an investigation, this becomes a federal matter. We'll be looking not just at Mr. Murphy's activities, but at anyone who may have assisted him or covered up his crimes." My stomach dropped. "You mean my parents? If your parents were aware of the theft and chose not to report it, that could potentially constitute conspiracy or accessory charges, depending on the circumstances." Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "Bryn, we talked about this possibility." We had talked about it, but hearing it from an FBI agent made it feel terrifyingly real. My parents could go to prison. Not just Marcus, but my parents, who were victims of his theft but had also become unwilling participants in covering it up. "Agent Santos, is there any way to handle this that doesn't involve prosecuting my parents?" "That depends on several factors. Their level of knowledge, their actions after discovering the theft, their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. If they were truly victims who were manipulated into protecting their son, and if they're willing to cooperate fully with our investigation, it's possible we could work something out." "What kind of cooperation?" "Complete financial disclosure, testimony about what they knew and when they knew it, assistance in recovering any stolen assets that might still be traceable. Essentially, they would need to stop protecting Marcus and start helping us build a case against him." I thought about my parents sitting around that dining room table, choosing to believe Marcus's lies rather than face the truth about what he'd done. I thought about them banishing me from the family to protect their comfortable illusions. I thought about them moving Grandma Rose to a cheaper nursing home rather than confronting their son about his theft. What are the chances they'd be willing to cooperate? Agent Santos studied my face carefully. "In my experience, that depends on how much they have to lose and whether they believe cooperation is their best option for minimizing the damage to their family." "Meaning?" "Meaning they need to understand that this investigation is happening with or without their cooperation, and that their best chance of protecting themselves and salvaging their relationship with you is to get ahead of it." The meeting lasted another hour. Agent Santos explained the investigation process, the likely timeline, the kinds of evidence they'd be gathering. She also made it clear that once we filed the complaint, there would be no stopping the process. The FBI would pursue the case wherever it led, regardless of my family's preferences or my personal feelings about the outcome. "I need some time to think about this," I said as we prepared to leave. "Of course. But Ms. Murphy, I want you to understand something. Cases like this, cases involving family members, are always emotionally difficult. There's never a good time to turn in someone you love, and there's never a way to do it that doesn't cause pain. But the question you need to ask yourself is whether the pain of seeking justice is worse than the pain of allowing the crimes to continue." Linda and I drove home in silence. When we got back to my apartment, we found Talia waiting in the parking lot, sitting in her car with the engine running. "We need to talk," she said when I approached her window. "About what?" "About the fact that you were just at the FBI field office. About the fact that you're apparently planning to have our brother arrested." My blood went cold. "How do you know where we were?"
Because I followed you, Bryn.
Because I was worried about what you might be planning, and it turns out I was right to be worried. Linda got out of her car and walked over to join us. Talia, maybe you should come upstairs so we can discuss this privately. I'm not going anywhere with either of you. I want to know what you told them. We told them the truth. The truth according to you. Your version of events. Your interpretation of documents you probably don't understand. I felt my temper flare. My interpretation? Talia, Marcus stole money. That's not an interpretation, it's a fact. He stole money from our family, and he stole money from elderly people at his previous job. Those are facts, not opinions. If they're facts, then why hasn't anyone been arrested yet? Why hasn't anyone been prosecuted? Because the people in positions to report the crimes chose to cover them up instead. Because Henderson and Associates cared more about their reputation than about justice. Because our parents care more about protecting Marcus than about protecting his victims. Talia got out of her car and slammed the door. His victims? Bryn, do you hear yourself? You're talking about our family like we're criminals. Some of us are criminals, Talia. And some of us are delusional. The argument that followed was the worst fight I'd ever had with my sister. She accused me of being obsessed with revenge, of manufacturing evidence to support a conspiracy theory, of being willing to destroy our family to feed my own ego. I accused her of being willfully blind, of choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, of enabling Marcus's crimes through her refusal to acknowledge them. Linda tried to mediate, but it was hopeless. Talia had made up her mind that I was the problem, and nothing I said was going to change that. I'm calling Mom and Dad, Talia finally said, pulling out her phone. I'm telling them what you're planning to do. Go ahead, I said. Tell them everything. Tell them that Marcus is a serial embezzler. Tell them that I have evidence of his crimes at Henderson and Associates. Tell them that the FBI is interested in investigating him. I'll tell them that you've completely lost touch with reality and that you're about to destroy our family based on paranoid delusions. She got back in her car and drove away, tires squealing on the asphalt. Linda and I stood in the parking lot for several minutes, not saying anything. Well, she said finally, I guess we know where everyone stands now. Do we? Your sister just chose a side, and it wasn't yours. Your parents chose their side weeks ago. Marcus chose his side the moment he decided to steal money from vulnerable people. And what side are we on? Linda looked at me with an expression that was equal parts sad and determined. We're on the side of the truth, honey. Even if that makes us the villains in everyone else's story. My phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Mom's number. I almost didn't answer it. Almost let it go to voicemail, so I could listen to whatever she had to say without having to respond immediately. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Bryn Elizabeth Murphy, what the hell do you think you're doing? I'd never heard my mother use that tone of voice before. Pure rage, barely controlled, like she was speaking through clenched teeth. Hello, Mom. Don't you hello, Mommy. Talia just told us that you've been to the FBI. That you're planning to have Marcus arrested. Is that true? Yes, it's true. The silence that followed lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. How could you do this to us? How could I do what? Report crimes to the appropriate authorities. Report alleged crimes. Alleged crimes that have already been explained to you by the people who actually understand what happened. Mom, I've seen evidence from Marcus's previous job. I know this isn't the first time he's stolen money. I don't care what lies some disgruntled former employee has told you. I don't care what documents you think you've found. Marcus is your brother, and family loyalty means something. What about loyalty to his victims? What victims? The only victims here are our family members who are being destroyed by your need to be right about everything. The conversation deteriorated from there. Mom accused me of being selfish, vindictive, and mentally unstable. She said I was tearing apart a family that had loved and supported me my entire life. She said that if I went through with this vendetta against Marcus, I would be dead to them forever. You're choosing strangers over your own family, she said, her voice breaking. I'm choosing justice over comfortable lies. Justice? Bryn, you don't even know what that word means. Justice would be accepting that you made a mistake and apologizing to your brother for the damage you've caused to his reputation and his marriage. His reputation? Mom, he's a thief. He stole money from elderly people with dementia. He is not a thief. He's a good man who made some poor financial decisions and trusted the wrong people to advise him. The fact that you can't see that, the fact that you're so consumed with hatred that you'd rather believe conspiracy theories than trust your own family, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. The call ended with her hanging up on me, but not before delivering one final devastating blow. Your father and I raised you better than this. We're ashamed of what you've become. I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart with their bare hands. Linda found me there an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, still staring at the same phone. What happened? I told her about the conversation with my mother, about the accusations and threats, about being disowned by the people who'd raised me. I'm sorry, honey. I know how much that must hurt. Linda, what if we're making a mistake? What if there's something we don't understand about the situation? What if we destroy everyone's lives and it turns out there was some explanation we missed? Linda sat down across from me and took my hands in hers. Bryn, do you remember what you told me about Marcus's gambling debts in college? Yes. Do you remember how your parents handled that situation? They paid his debts quietly. They made him promise to never do it again, and they never told anyone in the family what had happened. So, that's exactly what Henderson and Associates did when Marcus stole money from their clients. They covered up his crimes, they made financial restitution, and they quietly made him go away without facing any real consequences. I started to see where she was going with this. And that's exactly what your parents are trying to do now with the money he stole from your family. Cover it up, absorb the financial loss, and pretend it never happened. You think it's a pattern. I think it's the only pattern Marcus has ever known. Every time he gets caught doing something wrong, the adults in his life protect him from the consequences. They clean up his messes, they pay his debts, they make his problems disappear. And then they act surprised when he does the same thing again on a larger scale. She was right. I could see it clearly now, the progression from college gambling debts to client theft to family embezzlement. Each time, Marcus had been protected from facing real consequences. Each time, he'd learned that his charm and his family connections would save him from accountability. So, what do? We break the pattern. We make sure that this time, for the first time in his life, Marcus faces real consequences for his actions. Even if it destroys my relationship with everyone I love. Honey, look around you. Your relationship with everyone you love has already been destroyed. Your parents have disowned you. Your sister thinks you're delusional. Marcus sees you as a threat to be eliminated. She was right about that too. The relationships I was trying to preserve had already been sacrificed on the altar of protecting Marcus. The only question now, Linda continued, is whether you're going to let them destroy you in the process of protecting him, or whether you're going to fight back. I thought about Grandma Rose in her substandard nursing home. I thought about Patricia's mother-in-law, an elderly woman with dementia whose medical care money had been stolen. I thought about all the other victims we didn't even know about yet, people whose lives had been damaged by Marcus's sense of entitlement and his family's willingness to enable his behavior. And I thought about the person I wanted to be. Not the family scapegoat who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction and kept quiet to maintain peace. Not the daughter who sacrificed her principles to earn conditional love, but someone who stood up for what was right, even when it cost her everything. Linda, will you come with me to file the FBI complaint? Of course. Even though it means we're probably going to war with my entire family, especially because it means that. I called Agent Santos that night and scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. Over the weekend, Patricia Hensley contacted the other Henderson and Associates victims she'd mentioned, and by Sunday evening, we had commitments from 5 separate families to participate in a coordinated complaint against Marcus. 5 families, dozens of individual victims, hundreds of thousands of dollars in theft across multiple institutions, and several years. The scope of Marcus's crimes was staggering when laid out comprehensively. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a federal case involving systematic fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. On Sunday night, I got one last text message from Talia. "It's not too late to change your mind. Please don't do this to our family." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. I'm not doing this to our family. I'm doing this for all the families Marcus has hurt. Monday morning, Linda and I walked into the FBI field office and filed a formal complaint against Marcus Murphy for systematic embezzlement, wire fraud, and elder abuse. The war had officially begun, and there was no going back. If you're still with me at this point, if you've stayed for this entire journey, then you know that what happened next changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone in my family and everyone in our community. The truth has a way of spreading once it's finally allowed to see daylight, and what we discovered about Marcus was just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because the next chapter is going to show you what happens when a federal investigation tears through a small town like a tornado, exposing secrets that go back decades and involving people no one ever suspected. The real revelations were just beginning. The FBI works differently than I expected. I thought filing the complaint would lead to immediate arrests, dramatic confrontations, maybe Marcus being hauled away in handcuffs while my family watched in horror. Instead, Agent Santos explained that financial crimes investigations are methodical, quiet affairs that can take months to develop properly. "We need to build an airtight case," she told me during our first follow-up meeting, 2 weeks after filing the complaint. "That means analyzing financial records, interviewing witnesses, coordinating with other agencies, and making sure we understand the full scope of the criminal activity before we make any arrests." How long does that usually take? For a case like this? Probably 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months of living in limbo, knowing that federal agents were quietly investigating my family while my parents and siblings had no idea what was coming. The first sign that the investigation was moving forward came 3 weeks later, when my dad called me at work. "Bryn, I just got a call from someone at Henderson and Associates asking questions about Marcus's employment history. Do you know anything about this?" My heart started pounding. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about his access to client accounts, his financial responsibilities, his termination." The person I talked to said they were conducting a routine audit, but it didn't feel routine. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Did you tell Marcus about the call?" Of course I told Marcus. He said it's probably just some bureaucratic nonsense related to their insurance or licensing requirements. "And you believed that?" There was a long pause. "Bryn, are you somehow involved in this?" The temptation to confess everything was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to tell him about the FBI investigation, about the other victims, about everything I'd learned in the past month. But Agent Santos had been clear. Any information that got back to Marcus could jeopardize the investigation. "Dad, I think you should be prepared for the possibility that Marcus's problems at Henderson and Associates were more serious than he told you." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe the explanation you were given for those bank transfers isn't the whole truth." Another long pause. "Bryn, if you know something, you need to tell me. I've been trying to tell you for months. You just haven't wanted to listen." The call ended awkwardly, with neither of us saying what we really meant. But I could hear something in Dad's voice that hadn't been there before.
Doubt. Fear.
The dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, the daughter he'd banished from the family might have been telling the truth all along. Over the next few weeks, Linda and I watched the investigation's effects ripple through our family and community like stones thrown into still water. Marcus became increasingly paranoid and defensive. My parents started asking questions they'd never asked before. Talia called me twice, both times to demand information about what was happening, both times hanging up when I refused to give her details. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source.
Chelsea.
Marcus's wife called me on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after we'd filed the FBI complaint. "Bryn, we need to talk." I almost hung up. Chelsea had been one of my harshest critics during that family meeting, one of the people most determined to paint me as a delusional troublemaker. But something in her voice made me listen.
About what?
About Marcus. About what he's done. About what I found. We met at a coffee shop 30 minutes from my apartment, in a part of town where we were unlikely to run into anyone who knew our families. Chelsea looked terrible, thin, exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "I found documents," she said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Hidden in Marcus's home office. Bank statements, financial records, communications with people I don't recognize." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, records from banks in other states, correspondence about investment accounts, printouts of wire transfers to institutions I didn't recognize. "Chelsea, what am I looking at?" "I think you're looking at evidence that Marcus's financial problems are much bigger than anyone realized." The documents painted a picture that was even more disturbing than what we'd already uncovered. Marcus had been borrowing money from multiple sources: personal loans, cash advances, lines of credit opened under false pretenses. He'd been moving money between accounts to hide the true state of his finances. And he'd been doing it for years, long before he started stealing from Henderson and Associates, or our family's business. "How long have you known about this?" "I suspected something was wrong about 6 months ago, when Marcus started getting calls from creditors. He told me it was just temporary cash flow issues related to the business, that your parents were restructuring their debt, and it was affecting everyone's finances." "But you didn't believe him?" "I wanted to believe him. But then the calls kept coming, and the amounts kept getting bigger, and the explanations kept changing." She looked down at her hands. "And then you started asking questions about those bank transfers, and Marcus's reaction was intense." "What do you mean?" "I mean, he was angrier than I'd ever seen him. Not defensive angry, not embarrassed angry, but scared angry. Like someone who knew he'd been caught and was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage." Chelsea had been married to Marcus for 8 years. She'd seen him handle stress before, had watched him navigate difficult situations, had learned to read his moods and reactions. If she was telling me that his behavior around the embezzlement discovery was different, more panicked, then I believed her. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I think you were right. About everything. And because I think Marcus is in much deeper trouble than any of us realized." She pulled out another document from the folder, a letter from a collections agency demanding payment on a debt of nearly $30,000. "This came yesterday. It's for money Marcus borrowed against our house without telling me. Money I never saw, money that was supposedly for business investments." "Where did the money go?" "I don't know. But Bryn, if Marcus has been borrowing against our house, if he's been taking out loans and credit lines without my knowledge, then what else has he been doing? What else don't I know about?" It was a good question, and one that made me realize the investigation might uncover problems far beyond what we'd already documented. "Chelsea, there's something I need to tell you." I explained about the FBI investigation, about the other victims from Henderson and Associates, about the scope of Marcus's criminal activity. I watched her face go through a series of emotions: shock, denial, fear, and finally a kind of grim acceptance. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks. I filed the complaint about 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks. She laughed bitterly. 6 weeks that I've been living with someone who's apparently a career criminal, and I had no idea federal agents were investigating him. "Chelsea, I'm sorry. I know this is..." "Don't apologize. You did what you had to do. What I should have done months ago, when I first suspected something was wrong." "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to protect my daughter. I'm going to talk to a lawyer about divorce proceedings. And I'm going to cooperate with the FBI investigation if they ask me to." "Are you going to tell Marcus that we talked?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the coffee shop window at the parking lot.
"No."
"Not yet. I need to get my financial situation straightened out first. Need to make sure I understand the full scope of what he's done to our family's finances." "But Bryn..." "Yeah. When this investigation goes public, when Marcus is arrested, I want you to know that I'll testify about what I found. I'll help you prove that this was systematic, deliberate criminal activity." Driving home that night, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because Chelsea's documents provided additional evidence of Marcus's criminal behavior, confirmation that this wasn't just about the money he'd stolen from our family and Henderson and Associates clients. But sadness because I realized that Marcus's crimes had destroyed so much more than I'd understood. His marriage, his daughter's stability, his wife's financial security, their entire life together. But then I thought about all of his victims, and the sadness transformed back into determination. Marcus had made these choices. He'd decided to steal from vulnerable people, to lie to his family, to build his lifestyle on other people's money. The consequences of those choices weren't my responsibility. They were his. Agent Santos called me the next morning. "Ms. Murphy, we've made significant progress on the investigation. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss next steps." "What kind of next steps?" "The kind that involve search warrants and arrest warrants. We're moving into the active phase of the case." My hands started shaking. "How long do we have?" "Probably 2 to 3 weeks before we execute the warrants. I wanted to give you advance warning because, once we move forward, everything changes very quickly." 2 to 3 weeks before my brother would be arrested by federal agents. 2 to 3 weeks before my family's secrets became public record. 2 to 3 weeks before the war I'd started reached its inevitable conclusion. The endgame was finally beginning. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November. Agent Santos's voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear something underneath it that might have been excitement. "Ms. Murphy, we're executing the warrants this morning. I wanted you to know before you heard about it from other sources." I sat up in bed, instantly wide awake. "This morning, we're moving on multiple locations simultaneously. Mr. Murphy's residence, your parents' home and business, the Henderson and Associates offices. This is coordinated with local law enforcement, so there will likely be some media attention." Media attention? Of course there would be. The arrest of a local businessman for systematic embezzlement would be front-page news in our small city. When will Marcus be arrested? The arrest team should be at his residence within the next hour. 1 hour. In 1 hour, everything I'd set in motion months ago would become irreversibly real. "Agent Santos, what should I expect? How does this work?" "Mr. Murphy will be arrested and processed. There will likely be a bail hearing later today or tomorrow. The charges are serious enough that we'll be requesting he be held without bail, but that decision will be up to the judge." After we hung up, I sat in my bed for 10 minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. Then I called Linda. "It's happening," I said when she answered. "Today? This morning. They're arresting Marcus within the hour." Linda was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" It was a good question. How did I feel? Relieved that the investigation was finally moving forward. Terrified about my family's reaction. Sad about what this would do to Marcus's daughter. Vindicated that I'd been right all along. Guilty about being vindicated. "I feel like I'm about to throw up," I said honestly. "That's normal. This is a big day, honey. The day when all those secrets finally see daylight." I got dressed and drove to Linda's hotel, where we sat in her room watching local news coverage on her laptop. The first reports came in around 9 a.m. FBI agents have arrested a local businessman on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. Marcus Murphy, 32, was taken into custody this morning at his residence in connection with alleged financial crimes spanning several years and multiple victims. There it was. My brother's name and photograph on the news, described as a criminal. The man who'd bought me that cheap camera for Christmas when we were kids, now being led away in handcuffs. My phone started ringing almost immediately. The first call was from Talia, screaming and crying and barely coherent. "What have you done? What have you done to our family?" I tried to explain, tried to tell her that I'd done what had to be done, that Marcus had brought this on himself through his own actions. But she wasn't listening. She was just screaming, over and over, that I'd destroyed everything, that I'd ruined everyone's lives, that she would never forgive me. The second call was from my mother. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice cold and controlled in a way that was somehow worse than Talia's screaming. "Are you satisfied with what you've done to your brother?" "Mom, Marcus did this to himself." "No, Bryn. You did this. You, and whatever lies you told those FBI agents to convince them to destroy an innocent man's life. He's not innocent. You know he's not innocent." What I know is that my daughter has chosen to side with strangers against her own family. What I know is that you've destroyed your brother's marriage, traumatized his child, and ruined your parents' reputation in the community where we've lived for 30 years. The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mom, what about Marcus's victims? What about the elderly people he stole from? What about the damage he caused to your business and your retirement? There were no victims except the ones you created with your vendetta. There are 5 families from Henderson and Associates who... I don't want to hear it, Bryn. I don't want to hear your rationalizations or your excuses or your justifications. You have destroyed this family, and I will never forgive you for it. She hung up, and I sat staring at my phone, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart. Linda found me crying on her hotel room floor 20 minutes later. They hate me, I said through my tears. My entire family hates me. They're scared and they're embarrassed and they're clinging to denial because facing the truth is too painful. But what if they're right? What if I really have destroyed everything? What if I've ruined Marcus's daughter's life and my parents' reputation for nothing? Linda knelt down beside me and took my hands. Bryn, look at me. You didn't destroy anything. Marcus destroyed things. Years ago, when he decided to steal money from elderly people, you just made sure there were consequences for that destruction. But his daughter is better off knowing who her father really is than growing up believing lies. She's better off having a mother who's strong enough to leave a criminal than having parents who teach her that theft and deception are acceptable when they're committed by people you love. Over the course of that day, the full scope of the FBI's investigation became clear. The search warrants had uncovered evidence of crimes far beyond what we'd originally reported. Marcus had been running what amounted to a financial fraud operation for over 5 years, stealing from clients, employers, family members, and financial institutions. The total amount involved was over $400,000. Agent Santos called me that evening to update me on the day's developments. Mr. Murphy has been charged with 19 counts of wire fraud, 7 counts of elder abuse, and 5 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge denied bail, citing the systematic nature of the crimes and the flight risk posed by his access to multiple financial accounts. He's in jail? He's in federal custody, yes. The arraignment is scheduled for Thursday. What happens next? Now we build the case for trial. That means interviewing more witnesses, analyzing financial records, documenting the full extent of the damage. We'll need you to testify, both about what you discovered in your family's business and about your family's reaction when you tried to report the crimes. The idea of testifying against Marcus in open court was terrifying, but I knew it was necessary. I'll do whatever you need me to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus sitting in a federal holding cell, probably panicking, probably trying to figure out how he'd gotten caught, probably blaming me for ruining his life. But then I thought about Patricia's mother-in-law and all the other elderly victims whose medical care money he'd stolen. I thought about my parents' financial stress and Grandma Rose in her substandard nursing home. I thought about Chelsea, discovering that her husband had been lying to her for years about their financial situation. Marcus had hurt so many people, and he'd done it deliberately, systematically, without any regard for the damage he was causing. The consequences he was facing weren't my fault. They were the natural result of his own choices. At 11:30 p.m., I got one last phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Bryn, this is Chelsea. Chelsea, are you okay? I'm at my sister's house with Emma. The FBI searched our house today, took Marcus's computers and financial records. There were news crews outside. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. This needed to happen. She paused. Bryn, they found things I never knew about. Credit cards I'd never seen. Bank accounts I didn't know existed. Loans taken out in my name without my signature. The magnitude of Marcus's deception was staggering. He hadn't just stolen from employers and clients. He'd been systematically defrauding his own wife. What are you going to do? I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I'm cooperating fully with the FBI investigation. And I'm going to make sure Emma understands that what her father did was wrong, and that the people who exposed his crimes aren't the villains in this story. After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment feeling something I hadn't felt in months.
Peace.
Not happiness. There was too much pain and destruction for happiness. But peace. The peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when it cost you everything you thought you valued. My family might never forgive me. I might spend the rest of my life estranged from the people who raised me. But Marcus's crimes had finally been exposed, and his victims would finally have a chance at justice. That had to be worth something. That had to be worth everything. The war was over, and the truth had won. But as I would learn over the coming months, winning sometimes feels a lot like losing, especially when the battlefield is strewn with the wreckage of relationships that can never be repaired. The real question wasn't whether I'd made the right choice. The real question was whether I could live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of my life. And if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, if you've watched me tear apart my own family in the name of justice, then you know that some victories are Pyrrhic. Some battles are worth fighting even when winning destroys everything you thought you wanted to protect. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you'll be seen as the villain in everyone else's story. And sometimes that's a price worth paying. Because the alternative, staying silent while people you love hurt innocent victims, is a price that's much too high. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for listening to my story, even when it got ugly, even when there were no clear heroes or villains, just flawed people making impossible choices in terrible circumstances. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Please subscribe to this channel, because stories like this need to be told. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight within our own families, against our own loved ones, for the sake of people we've never met. Those battles are worth fighting, even when they cost us everything.